I'm the one you've been looking for. Good to be here. I always love to come and be with Jack and O.S. Hawkins, who's a buddy I talked to on the phone several times during the month. And you know what? If you're a pastor, when you come to Prestonwood, you just walk in the building and you get your batteries recharged. Just to see what God is doing here in this place and under the faithful leadership of Pastor Graham and all the wonderful people here in Dallas in this ministry, and how it is so wonderfully reflected around the world with many young men who grew up here who are pastoring. I run into Prestonwood guys everywhere I go, and so encouraging. And Louis, it's good to see you. Is Louis Gomer a good storyteller or what? Listen, 2 or 3 years ago, we had an arena event in Washington, D.C., and someone said, Dr. J, while you're in Washington, you need to go take a tour of the Capitol building. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to do that. I've got a busy schedule. Oh, don't worry about it. It's at night. I said, what do you mean? Well, it's almost like at midnight. I said, you can take a tour of the Capitol building at midnight? Yeah, and they said, this guy who takes the tour, man, he knows everything about everything. So my family, my wife and my kids and I, we get in this little bus and we go to the Capitol building. You can't see where you're going. All the ground lights are turned off. So you got to follow, somebody leads you, and you go in the back door, and there's Louis. And he starts taking you on this tour. And if you've ever been in the Capitol building, there's like these little alcoves where they have little statues and pictures and all that. He knows everything about everything that's in that building. And if you go on that tour, he's going to tell you everything about everything that's in that building. That's all right if it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. This is midnight. And we got past about the third one, and I leaned over to Don and I said, look at all these other places. Is he going to talk about all of these? He's a great storyteller. Louis, it's great to hear you. Thank you for being here. I have to tell you guys a couple of stories. The Super Bowl is over, but I love these two stories. Surprised to see an empty seat at the Super Bowl stadium, a diehard fan remarked about this empty seat to a woman who was sitting near the empty seat. Well, it was my husband's, the woman explained, but he died. I'm very sorry, said the man, but I'm really surprised that another relative or a friend or somebody didn't jump at the chance to take the seat reserved for him. Beats me, she said. They all insisted on going to the funeral. So I heard about this guy who had 2 tickets for the 2017 Super Bowl. Both of them were box seats. He paid $5,700 for each ticket, which was the going price this year. But he had bought these tickets real early, and he didn't realize when he bought the tickets that the game was on the same day as his wedding. So now he can't go. So if you're interested and would like to go in his place, it's at the First Community Church in Atlanta, Georgia at 4 p.m. Her name is Tiffany. She's 5'3". She's a great cook, and she'll be the one in the white dress. Well, some of you may know I grew up in Ohio. My father was the president of Cedarville College, and the chancellor spent 50 years of his life in that institution. I moved there when I was in the 7th grade. And I discovered to my disappointment when I got to Cedarville, Ohio, that the school there was so small they didn't have a football team. So I had no other choice but to become a basketball player. And become a player I did. I played that game as if my life depended on it. I mean, I don't know how good I was, but I know that nobody practiced more than I did. And I ended up playing 4 years of varsity basketball in high school and got a scholarship to play in college for 4 years. But the game was a lot different back then when I played it. There was no three-point line. There was no shot clock. I mean, the three-point line would have made some difference in the way we played back then, but not nearly as much as the shot clock. Some of you will remember what basketball was like before the 24-second clock. If you played the game and you happened to get a little bit of a lead, you would be told to slow the game down in the third quarter. In the fourth quarter, you would be told to pull the ball out and pass the ball around in a four-corner offense, they would call it. What you were doing, you weren't trying to score at all. It was like keep away from the other team. We didn't try to score, but since we had the ball, the other team couldn't score either. And I have to tell you guys, I hated it when we did that. I was a shooter. And truth be told, it wasn't usually very successful. When we pulled the ball out and stopped trying to score, we often made mistakes and let the other team back into the game. And I remember that we lost a whole lot of games when we tried not to lose instead of trying to win. The basketball fathers saw it that way too. And they changed the rules to eliminate that strategy. Nobody wants to pay good money to watch a team play keep away. If you'll pardon me for a moment, I almost brought my Chargers jacket with me and I was going to throw it out into the crowd to somebody, whoever might want to catch it. I'd like to apply the truth that I've just mentioned to you to the team that used to be in my city. I've been a fan of the Chargers for 35 years. I've had season tickets. Whenever I could sneak out of church early enough to get there for the 1 o'clock game, I'd go, and if they ever played on the Monday nights or Thursdays, I never missed. But with the exception of our run to the Super Bowl in 1984, we have had a long and painful journey of trying not to lose. We play great football in December, sneak into the playoffs, and then so often we'd stop trying to win and begin trying not to lose. I'm not here to rip the Chargers because I don't really care about them anymore. But I died 1,000 deaths when we put our incredible quarterback on ice and tried to run the ball. 1 week, we would win by passing the ball 58 times, and then we would throw it 7 times in the first half the next game. And I often thought, once would they just throw caution to the wind, pull out all the stops from the very first play until the last. But it seems to me as a somewhat educated fan that we spend an awful lot of time and energy trying not to lose and not nearly enough time trying to win. And what we do in sports, men, we sometimes do in life. And I want to go on record today by saying that I don't think God created us in our lives to try not to lose. He created us to win. He created us to live our lives each day with that as our goal. When we are trying not to lose, we are living out of fear. And when we're trying to win, we are living out of faith. There's so many individuals in the Bible whose lives we could model this principle after. But my very favorite one is a man by the name of Caleb. Only 30 verses in the Bible tell the whole story of Caleb's life. But he left us a legacy as men that is so powerful, we dare not forget him. As most of you know, Caleb is the less celebrated friend of Joshua. And you remember that the two of these men brought the minority report from the promised land, which they described when they brought the report back as an abundant land of milk and honey, and they were ready to seize their inheritance in God's name. Unfortunately, there were some of the scouts in that reconnaissance team, and that majority party counseled the Israelites to fear the giants in the land and keep away. You see, they were afraid of losing, and they had given up their hope of winning. And listen to their sorry words from Numbers chapter 13. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, who came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. and so were we in their sight. The people of Israel believed the trying not to lose report, and their lack of faith cost them an entire generation of restless wandering before they finally claimed the land that God had reserved for them. But are you familiar with the rest of Caleb's story? In Joshua chapter 14, Joshua and Caleb have now arrived in the promised land after 45 years of wandering around in the wilderness. Joshua is very old, and he's finishing up the process of parceling out the land to the various tribes of Israel, giving them an assignment so they have to go in and settle this part of the land. Caleb is 85 years old. And when he approaches Joshua to ask for his portion of the land that he wants to settle, here's what he said. And the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, he said, "You know the word which the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. But nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. But I wholly followed the Lord my God, and Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God." So after 45 years of wandering in the wilderness, the promise of God was still the obsession of Caleb's heart, and he is about to make a huge difference, not only for himself, but for his people, and in essence, for all of us here today. So how is this so? What made him so unique? I'd like to suggest to you, first of all, that Caleb was enthusiastic about life. In Joshua 14, 10, and 11, this is how Caleb described himself when he was 85 years of age. I take such great courage from this. "And now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now," he said, "here I am, this day, 85 years old, and yet I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in." It's clear that Caleb was as passionate at 85 as he had been when he was 40. But where did that passion come from? It certainly wasn't the product of an easy life. He wasn't just sliding along, coasting along all those years. Someone has suggested that you could describe the life of Caleb between the time he was 40 and he was 85 by using 3 Ds: desert, death, and discouragement. You see, what God told the people of Israel when they refused to believe the promise was that none of that generation would be allowed to go into the promised land. So all of Joshua and Caleb's contemporaries were dying. You might remember that this condition was that unfaithfulness would keep them from the promise. All of the ones who tried not to lose had to die before God would permit the crossing of the Jordan. It took 38 wilderness years for that to happen. And Caleb kept getting older and older as he waited through the decades, checking the obituaries every day to see the last of his old friends die. Our text only gives us 2 hints as to why Caleb was able to remain enthusiastic about life. In verse 10, Caleb attributes his passion to the grace of God. It was God who kept him alive, it says. But these verses also are a reminder to you and me, men here, that there's a physical benefit that we don't want to miss out on. These verses remind us of the benefit of physical health. That if we're going to maintain our vigor and our strength, we have to kind of work at it. You might not think that's terribly important, but if you're going to achieve great things for God, you'll need some sort of vigor to do it. And the only ministry that you are ever going to have in all of your life, you're going to have it in your body. I know you can pray, and in a way that ministers outside the body, but you can't preach without a body. You can't teach without a body. You really can't really minister without a body, and your ministry will take place through your body, so you better take care of it. When you wear out this body, you don't get a new one till you get to heaven. You can't stop the aging process. As you get older, your body will begin to deteriorate. But somehow Caleb was able to maintain a physical vigor even during a long journey in the wilderness. A generation of funerals, 4 decades in the heat and sand of the wilderness, would make the best of us gloomy and morose, but not Caleb. The verses show us that his engines were still revving, the fire in the furnace of his soul was still lit, and he was still enthusiastic about life. There's not anything in the Bible that says when you get to be a certain age, you can quit being enthusiastic about life. When you quit loving life, you quit living life. And all of us need to take note of that. I heard all these things along the way. Everybody's saying as you get older, it takes twice as long to stay in the same amount of fitness. You know what I found out about that? It's true. It's true. So you got to figure out how to do it. Caleb was enthusiastic about life. Here's the second thing I noticed about this man. He was excited about the future. And Caleb had a lot of reasons why he might have wanted to just forget about the future, because it looked like he wasn't going to have one. I mean, for 40 years, nothing could happen meaningful for him because he was a part of that generation. Even though he himself was not guilty, he had to pay the penalty. But no one questioned Caleb's pulse. 40 years earlier, he had done reconnaissance in the hostile territory, and he and Joshua had been there and seen what was the promise of God to his people. And when he came back from the promised land to give his minority report, he based his recommendations not on the problems, but on the provision and the power of God. Someone once told me that the difference between the guys who said they couldn't do it and the 2 guys who said they could was just this. The majority saw the giants in the land in comparison to themselves. Joshua and Caleb saw the giants in comparison to God. That's really what happens along the way, isn't it? You have to decide who you're going to compare your problems to, who you're going to use as your lynch point for your problems. Listen to the boldness now of what Caleb said to the people when he came back to give them his report. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses, and he said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, "The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. And if the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey." And oh, if the people had only just listened to Caleb, if they had only just followed these 2 men, if they'd only heard the voice of faith instead of the voice of fear. In taking counsel from the voice of fear, they doomed themselves to a generation of emptiness and wandering. And we do the same thing when we listen to the wrong internal voices. Caleb waited out the time through the punishment, even though it wasn't his to endure. He kept his heart young and his faith active, and at 85 years old, he told God what he wanted. "Now therefore give me this mountain, Hebron, of which the Lord spoke in that day. For you heard in that day how the Anakim were there, and that the cities were great and fortified. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said." Wow. When Caleb came before Joshua to request his portion of the land, he asked for the area known as Hebron. I don't know what you know about Hebron, but let me explain to you why I think Caleb asked for that portion of land. When he was marching through the land those earlier years, he saw Hebron, and someone pointed to him and said, "Do you know that Hebron is a sacred place here? Do you know who is buried in Hebron?" And probably Caleb said no, and then somebody said, "Sarah's buried here. And Abraham is buried here, and Isaac and Joseph and Rebekah, they're all buried here." This was really the only sacred burial place in the land of Canaan up until that time. And the interesting thing about this was that Caleb was not even a full-fledged Jew. Read the record carefully, and you will discover that his father was a man by the name of Jephunneh, and his father Jephunneh was a Kenizzite. And if you read the Old Testament, you remember that the tribes that were to be driven out of the land of Canaan were the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Girgashites, and the Kenizzites. Caleb really had his roots already in Canaan. And how he and his family ever got over into Egypt with the Israelites, I have no idea. But somehow they became a part of the Israelite community, and as he came to understand the history of God's people, he literally fell in love with that glorious legacy. And the Bible tells us that in Hebron there were many who were Anakims. The word Anakim is a word for giant. So here's this 85-year-old guy, Caleb, and when he has his chance to get his assignment, he chooses the one place in all of Canaan that nobody else has volunteered for. We know why. And isn't it interesting that Caleb at the age of 85 says, "I want that mountain as my inheritance, and I will go and I will subdue the giants in the land of Hebron." Caleb didn't use his gray hair to beg off the heavy lifting. He asked for a worthy challenge because he had the wisdom to know that with powerful quest comes powerful reward. Knock down a giant and you become one yourself. At age 85, Caleb still had a vision for the future. And when you begin to lose that vision for the future, you've already started the process of dying. It's like a little bit of poetry I read not long ago that goes like this: "Since I have retired from life's competition, each day is filled with complete repetition. I get up every morning and dust off my wits, go pick up the paper and read the obits. If my name isn't there, I know I'm not dead, so I get a good breakfast and go back to bed." That's the way a lot of guys I know live their final life. I'm so grateful for Caleb. This is not just about people in my age bracket. Remember, men, the way Caleb thought started when he was 40. He prepared himself for the future by the right thinking from the very beginning. He didn't start thinking this way when he became an octogenarian. He started thinking this way when he was a young man. How we think about life, how we look to the future, will set the stage for how it plays out for us in many ways. And I don't know about you, I love life. I'm hanging out for as long as I can. And I love what I'm doing, and I'm having more fun doing it than I ever had in my whole life. And Caleb reminds me that it's always wrong to try not to lose, and always right to try to win. Let me give you the third thing I've observed about him. He was enthusiastic about life, he was excited about the future, and he was energized by his assignment. You know, I read the Bible a lot and study it, and sometimes I get a little irritated with the Bible. Do you ever get irritated with the Bible? There's a phrase in the Bible that I don't like. I'm going to out it today in front of all you guys. There's a phrase in the Bible that goes like this: "He was old and advanced in years." And I think that's piling on, Jack. I really do. I mean, tell me I'm old, that's okay, but don't tell me I'm old and advanced in years. I don't like that. But it's interesting to me that 5 of the 6 times that phrase appears in the Bible is about somebody who is getting ready to experience something astounding in his life or her life. For instance, Abraham, 100 years old, and Sarah, age 90, are old and advanced in years as they're about to give birth to Isaac. Zacharias and Elizabeth are old and advanced in years before they give birth to John the Baptist. And we're told here that Joshua was old and advanced in years before he receives his marching orders to enter the land of God's promise. Joshua 13:1, now Joshua was old and advanced in years. Come on, man. And the Lord said to him, you are old and advanced in years. And there remains very much land yet to be purchased. The Israelites were given specific instructions about dealing with the region's inhabitants. But at the age of 85, only Caleb ever carried out those instructions. I never realized this before till I just broke this all down, went and looked at all the scriptures. Let me tell you what I found out. Remember now, he's the oldest one. He took the hardest task. And as you read through these chapters in Joshua, you see the words did not drive them out over and over and over. I'll put some of them up on the screen. Nevertheless, the children of Israel did not drive out the Geshurites or the Maccathites. As for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah could not drive them out. And they did not drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer. You say, well, Pastor Jeremiah, what's the difference? The people they didn't drive out because they were trying not to lose and they weren't willing to try to win. And those people they didn't drive out became a thorn in their side for the entire rest of their existence, and even to some degree today. When we try not to lose instead of trying to win, we leave baggage along the way that comes back to haunt us and keep us from being victorious for the Lord. After the glorious crossing of the Jordan, the Israelites left unfinished business in their wake. They were obviously trying not to lose. If they had done what they were told to do and tried to win, they would have driven out all of these tribes who were enemies of God, and their future would have been peaceful and secure. But instead, the Canaanites remained their enemies, and a collective sword in their side for years to come. Then there was Caleb. Oh, man. He refused to let the losing mentality of his younger and stronger brothers affect him. He was a winner, clear through the heart. And even though he was the oldest of all of them, this is what we read in Joshua 15:14. Caleb drove out the three sons of Anak from there, Sheshai, Ahiman, Talmai, the children of Anak. He went to the toughest place where there were the toughest enemies, and while everybody else was trying not to lose, not Caleb, I'm going to do what God called me to do. These people are gone. And he drove them out. No unfinished business for Caleb. I've been learning something, and I've been sharing it with our people, trying to do it consistently because I believe it to be one of the most important things you can ever think about as a follower of Christ. Listen to this. The time between when God tells you to do something and when you ultimately do it, that time between here and here, all that time belongs to the devil. It doesn't belong to God. God is not a sometime I'll do it God. God is, I say you do it, and you do it now. The devil loves it when we postpone obedience because into that environment, he works his magic. And before you know it, as some of you already know here today, a month goes by and then a year goes by, and you're sitting here in this room wondering why 5 years ago God called you to do something and you still haven't done it because you let the enemy get in that little parentheses between what God says and what we do. Caleb did not do that. He heard the voice of God clearly and he finished the task that was given him. Now my time is almost up, but I want to ask you this question. Why was Caleb so uniquely different than all of his contemporaries? You know, sometimes you see a lesson in the Word of God and it's so startling, and I get excited when I find something I haven't seen before. It kind of comes alive in my heart. And I usually run and tell Donna, hey, look what I just found. I've been reading this passage for all these years. I never saw this. I want to give you a little secret about Caleb that I never saw until I studied it recently. Remember I told you there's only 30 verses in all of the Bible about Caleb? I want to tell you that the secret of his life is found 6 times in those 30 verses. You don't have to wonder why Caleb was different, and you don't have to wonder how you can be different. I'm going to give you his secret today. I'm not going to make it up. I'm going to put it on the screen. I'm going to show you where it is in the Bible, and you cannot miss it. Here is his secret to success. Here's God's evaluation. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully. Numbers 32:12, Caleb wholly followed the Lord. Deuteronomy 1:36, because he wholly followed the Lord. Joshua 14:8, nevertheless my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. Here's Moses' statement. So Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. And here's Joshua. Hebron therefore became the inheritance of Caleb because he wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. Caleb's passion breaks through so that we cannot miss it. He had wholly followed God with all of his heart. And by the time he was 85, while most of his generation had given up hope and died, Caleb was still a bright fire burning in his generation. He still wanted to leap up on the greatest possible task that God could give him. And as we reflect on the principles of winning and losing, I want you to know that every day we make decisions that put us on one side of that ledger or the other. Men, don't stop trying to win. You're going to be defeated. You're going to have some disappointments. But don't ever say, well, I'm a Christian. I guess I don't have to be that great a Christian. I'm just going to kind of hang in there, get to church when I can, but I'm not going to try to win and wholly follow God. Over the life of any one of us, we look back where there were decisions about how we were going to do life. I don't usually talk about this kind of thing because if I do, I'm afraid that it will reflect in a way that I'm uncomfortable with it reflecting. But this is a story I want to tell you. It was the early 90s. I had been the pastor of Shadow Mountain Church for about 10 years. After almost 8 years of struggling with the establishment of California, we were finally able to build a worship center and move into the new worship center. I was preaching 5 services every weekend in a small little chapel because we didn't have any place big enough for people to come. We knew we were about to experience dramatic growth, and we were trying to get ready for it. And one of the issues that we were discussing at that time had to do with how we were going to give our offerings to the Lord through our church. I'll have to explain this. You mostly are church people. You will understand it. For many years prior to my coming to Shadow Mountain Church, and for all of the years up to this point, the people at Shadow Mountain had always used what they called a 2-line envelope. One line gave them an opportunity to direct their gifts toward the general budget of the church, and the other line was for missions giving. I never thought that was a very good thing because I discovered as a young pastor that when people were mad at you about something you did in the church, they put all their money in the missions department. And when they were mad about something in missions, they put it all in the church department. So it was pretty hard to control the emotions. But our concern as we anticipated the growth of the church, and by the way, the church tripled like in 2 years after we moved into that building. Our concern was, with this 2-line budget thing, what's going to happen to missions? We won't be able to teach people fast enough how that works, and so missions is going to get left behind. And we came to believe that we had to change the way we were giving. In a meeting that I will never forget, we began talking about giving a percentage of all of our giving to missions. At that time, our missionary budget was about $250,000 a year. So someone suggested that if we give 5% of our giving, we would not lose much in missions giving. Try not to lose. And another suggested that if we ask our people to tithe to the church, maybe the church should tithe to missions. The room got really quiet. You mean take 10% out of our offerings and give that amount to ministries outside of our four walls? Up to this point in our discussion, all we were trying to do was figure out a way to keep from losing our missions giving when we moved into the new building. And then I heard myself say, what do you think God would do for us if we gave 20% of our giving to missions going forward? That was a long time ago, and I don't remember everything that happened at that time, but I do remember how quiet it got and how long it stayed quiet. And then a man by the name of Ralph Radford spoke up, one of the great men in the history of our church. And he encouraged us to take that challenge, and he predicted that God would bless us if we did that. And someone reminded us that missions was the closest thing to the heart of God in the Bible, and that God had sent his own son into this world as the first missionary. Long story short, we made that decision and have carried it out without interruption from that day until now. And here's the result of that moment of not trying to lose, but trying to win. We currently support 108 missionary families in ministry in 41 countries, over 50 different languages. We underwrite 3 pregnancy care centers, a downtown rescue mission, the Servicemen's Center, World Help, all of our own ethnic ministries to the Spanish, Arabic, Burmese, Iranian, and the Filipinos. And here's the most astonishing statistic I have encountered in a long time. From that day that we made that decision not to just try to keep from losing, but to try to win, the people of Shadow Mountain Community Church have given $34 million to missions. Think of that. Now, that's certainly not going to set any records where there are lots of churches that give a lot. Just think of that for a moment. We made a decision to win and not just keep trying to keep from losing, and God honored that decision in this magnificent way. To God be the glory. And God's just waiting for us to do that ourselves. You're in a position right now where God is speaking to you about something he wants you to do, and you've got all the reasons lined up as to why this isn't the right time, this is not the right setting, this is probably not even from God. And I heard Louis say, if you're a Christian and you hear somebody speaking to you inside and you're walking with God, it's probably God. And you better listen to what he's saying. One of the men whose writings I have come to love, and a man who I've come to love himself, is a guy by the name of Mark Batterson. And Mark Batterson's book, he wrote these words, and I want to leave you with this challenge. He said, a century ago, a band of brave souls became known as one-way missionaries. They purchased single tickets to the mission field without the return half, and instead of suitcases, they packed their few earthly belongings into a coffin. And as they sailed out of port, they waved goodbye to everyone they loved, everything they knew, and they knew they would never, ever see them again. A.W. Milne was one of those missionaries. He set sail for the New Hebrides in the South Pacific, knowing full well that the headhunters who lived there had martyred every missionary who had ever gone there before him. Milne didn't fear for his life because he had already died to himself. His coffin was packed, and for 35 years he lived among that tribe and loved them. And when he died, tribe members buried him in the middle of their village and inscribed this on his tombstone. When he came here, there was no light, and when he left, there was no darkness. And Batterson finishes that story by asking, when did we start believing that God wants to send us to safe places and do easy things? That faithfulness is holding the fort. That playing it safe is safe. Jesus didn't die to keep us safe. He died to make us dangerous. Faithfulness is not holding the fort. It's storming the gates of hell. It's time to quit living as if the purpose of life is to arrive safely at death. It's time to go all in and all out for the all in all. Pack your coffins. You say, Dr. Jeremiah, those are all great stories, stories of the mission field, stories of the church, stories of a different time. They're just the stories of our lives, yours and mine. Every day when I go to work, I have to make decisions based upon whether I'm going to try to lose or I'm going to try to win. And as you get older as a pastor, it's real easy to say, well, I'm not going to deal with that. I'll let the next guy deal with it. I'm not going to mess with that. Instead of going every day and say, by the grace of God, I want to make this place the best it can be for His honor and glory, for the salvation of souls and the building up of saints. I pray that you will hold me accountable and hold each other accountable as we continue to grow in our faith and as we continue to grow as Christians. That we don't get the mentality of just trying not to lose, but that we ask God to make us winners in our hearts, in our lives, and in our ministries. Amen? Let's all stand together, shall we? Father, we stand here today, and I know I speak for every man in this place. I speak for myself. Forgive me, forgive us for the many times where we took the easy way, where we decided all we had to do was kind of show up. All we had to do is not lose, just kind of hang in there and not have the mentality that you've called us to a ministry that demands everything we have, and there's no easy way. There's no other way. Thank you for the wonderful attention of these men, and I pray as we leave here today, we'll go with this challenge in our hearts. Somewhere today, somewhere along the way, you're going to say something to us, and it's going to be up to us either to say yes or to let Satan have an opportunity to work us over. Make us men of obedience, men of faith, and men who win. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do, so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move, so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that, spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas, think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're worth my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you are behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains that last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah.
Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help. I had to do it all myself.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Gonna learn the consequence of being incompetent. Mental health is confidence, dreams into modestness. I'm not here to save the day, that's for you to take away. I could play a million mind games, but instead I say something not illogical, something that is topical. Rub it on and watch it go, make yourself unstoppable.